Whether it's in real life or in fiction, elite military units are inescapable, it seems. Whether it's Terminator Marines from Warhammer, the King's Guard from A Song of Ice and Fire, the Green Berets, the Janissaries, the Praetorian Guard, or, today's subject, the Sardaukar from Dune. While there are several disputed aspects of Denis Villeneuve's Dune, such as Dr. Yui getting barely any character development or the token wokeness, shall we say, one thing most people who've seen Dune Part 1 agree on is that the Sardaukar are pretty badass and they get one hell of an introduction.
Sardaukar,
Just so. 3 battalions. As agreed.
And so let us dive into what were for thousands of years the deadliest fighters in the Dune universe. I will also touch briefly on a few of the other elite units that succeeded them, like the Fedaykin or the Fish Speakers, so this video contains a minor warning for spoilers of events from Dune Messiah onward. The exact origins of the Sardaukar are never really elaborated on, either in the core Frank Herbert books or in the expanded Dune books written by Brian Herbert and Kevin Anderson. The closest we get to an origin, and a very scanty one at that, comes from the Dune Encyclopedia, a series of articles written by various people and eventually compiled into a single work by Dr. Willis E. McNelly, a friend of Frank Herbert. The Dune Encyclopedia was based mostly on the first 4 Dune books intended to fill in the background of the universe, and was hailed as canon until there were several factors within it that were contradicted by Herbert's last 2 Dune books, Heretics and Chapterhouse. But it remains the only piece of Dune media that provides anything resembling an origin for the Sardaukar. According to the Dune Encyclopedia, the Sardau tribe essentially conquered all of Salusa Secundus, forging the other human communities into a planet-spanning empire. In this version, the Sardaukar were created as an elite military unit mostly to try and control the subjugated populations. Following the Butlerian Jihad, the Sardaukar were hired out as mercenaries by several of the noble houses of the nascent Landsraad. This proved to be a mistake as, anticipating the Krogans from Mass Effect, the Sardaukar basically decided to try and spread out and conquer everything they could. Being the deadliest warriors humanity had ever produced up to that point, the Sardaukar did this very easily until the forces of the Landsraad were able to fight them to a standstill at the Battle of Corran. The compromise that resulted from this led to one of the leaders of the Sardaukar becoming the first Padishah Emperor, and thus the establishment of House Corrino, which would rule over the empire until its overthrow by Paul Atreides. Given the disputed canonicity of the Dune Encyclopedia, you are free to take or leave this origin story as you see fit. But now we come to the meat of the matter. What made the Sardaukar the deadliest warriors ever known in the Dune universe, and how did they fight? In some ways, the Dune universe operates on the assumption that strong men are the product of harsh environments. Thus, the Sardaukar were the toughest warriors in the universe because they came from a very harsh world, and that the reason why the Fremen ultimately surpassed them is that they come from a world that is even harsher. But where Arrakis is harsh because it's a desert world with almost no water and giant killer sandworms, Salusa Secundus is often described as a world populated by savage predators and extreme climate changes. The average temperature of any given region can shift from -45 degrees Celsius, that's -49 Fahrenheit, to 60 degrees Celsius or 140 Fahrenheit. So basically from Antarctica to the Sahara on a dime. Sardaukar training begins with small children, and given the environmental conditions, it's small wonder that 50% of them are said to die before they reach the age of 11. Similar to the traditions of ancient Sparta, these child soldiers, the descendants of criminals imprisoned on Salusa Secundus, are expected to survive with minimal assistance, including foraging for their own food. So in addition to scrounging for survival, as well as dodging the various predators of Salusa Secundus, they are also subjected to intense, fearsomely harsh training. They are ruthlessly disciplined in the ways of killing and in the ways of stealth, essentially making them futuristic medieval commando troopers, as oxymoronic as that sounds. In the expanded Dune, it is said that Seleucus Secundus is not just environmentally difficult, it's also an irradiated wasteland. Supposedly, shortly after the Butlerian Jihad, another of the noble houses, House Tantor, used forbidden atomics in an attempt to destroy House Carino and take over the empire, as Seleucus Secundus was originally the homeworld of House Carino. Though the world was devastated, the attempt to destroy the imperial family failed, and afterwards, Seleucus Secundus became the training world of the Sardaukar, while House Carino moved itself to Khitan as the new capital of the empire. While never described in great detail in any of the Dune books, it is taken as an article of faith that prior to the rise of Paul Muad'Dib, the Sardaukar were the most elite and deadliest fighters in the galaxy. Their blade skills were said to be on par with that of the highest masters of the Ginaz swordsmanship school, and that their hand-to-hand combat abilities were on par with that of the Bene Gesserit and their Weirding Way. In addition to the brutal training and harsh discipline, the Sardaukar were also instilled with religious fervor, making themselves utterly loyal to House Carino, thus ensuring that the Padishah emperors never had to worry about their prized bodyguards ever turning against them. Not much is mentioned about the fighting tactics of the Sardaukar. The only details that can be found say that when surrounded, Sardaukar will break into small groups of 3, each fighting back to back to back. They also have a penchant for concealed weapons, garrots hidden in their hair, or small poisoned blades hidden in false fingers or toes. However, it seems that they do have a very distinct fighting style, so that even when they are disguised as the Harkonnens in the attack on the Atreides forces can recognize the Sardaukar as Sardaukar because the way they fight is so different from that of the Harkonnens. As to be expected of the most elite soldiers in all of Dune, the Sardaukar are trained to kill with all manner of weapons. From the typical knives and swords, to short-range needle guns and stunners, garrots, throwing knives, the famous hunter-seeker, and even las guns. Though one must assume this is used rarely, as the personal shield has rendered energy weapons useless in Dune. One weapon that requires special consideration is the flip dart, a small single-shot weapon that deploys a usually poisoned needle at close range. The flip dart is so named for the flip cover used to conceal the needle. By the reign of Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, the Sardaukar were still a formidable force, but they had begun to slip a little. Millennia of unchallenged dominance as a military force led them to succumb to overconfidence and arrogance, while the religious fervor that had made them such devoted servants of the Padishah emperors had been eroded by cynicism and power play. But of course, the death knell of the Sardaukar was their defeat by Paul Atreides Fremen. After Paul forced Shaddam IV to abdicate, the Sardaukar were all but disbanded. The new emperor allowed House Carino to only retain 1 battalion of 30,000 Sardaukar as a personal army. In place of the Sardaukar arose the Fedaykin, Paul's personal guard of elite Fremen death commandos. The Fedaykin, however, proved to be far more short-lived than their predecessors. After Paul was blinded by a treacherous Fremen conspiracy, in keeping with the customs of his adopted people, Paul abdicated the throne and went off into the deserts of Arrakis to die. With his 2 children, Ghanima and Leto II, being mere infants, Paul's sister Alia would serve as regent until they came of age. One of Alia's first acts as regent was the dissolution of the Fedaykin. What's more, as Arrakis was increasingly terraformed and became more lush and habitable, without the harsh landscape of the desert, the traditions of the Fremen eroded, and the fanatic desert warriors grew soft just as their world grew soft. As for the remaining Sardaukar, they became tied to House Atreides when Faradin Carino, grandson of the deposed Emperor Shaddam IV through his daughter Wensicia, became concubine to Ghanima Atreides, sister of God Emperor Leto II Atreides. With the mingling of the bloodlines of House Carino and House Atreides, the Sardaukar's loyalty shifted to that of the God Emperor. However, this loyalty would prove much more short-lived than the old loyalty to House Carino. At some undetermined point during Leto II's millennia-long reign, one of the many Golas of the Atreides swordmaster Duncan Idaho convinced the remaining Sardaukar to join with him in an attempted overthrow of Leto II. Like all such rebellions, it was completely crushed. The Duncan Gola was killed, and the Sardaukar were disbanded, never to rise again. In their place, Leto II would create the all-female order of Fish Speakers. They would serve him loyally and faithfully until Leto's own demise millennia later. Thousands of years later, by the time of Heretics of Dune, the Fish Speakers too had declined in power and were little more than a defunct organization. They still controlled regions of human space, but most of their leaders had by this point been replaced by face dancers of the Beni Tleilax, rendering these once formidable warrior women little more than the pawns and puppets of the Tleilaxu clone masters. And so, while the Sardaukar in particular lasted an impressive amount of time, it seems that elite units simply cannot withstand the test of time. To paraphrase Shakespeare, each strutted and fretted its hour upon the stage, and then was heard no more.